Do you also cry from hunger? The voice, small and startlingly clear, pierced the symphony of a Manhattan downpour. David Thompson, the 42-year-old CEO of a fintech empire valued at $2 billion, looked up, his world a blur of rain and tears. He was on his knees in the middle of Wall Street, his $3,000 suit soaked through, his carefully constructed universe having crumbled into dust just hours before. He was a king without a kingdom, a father without a son, and in that moment, he was crying like a lost child. Before him stood a small, spectral figure, a black girl, no older than 10, barefoot and dressed in clothes that were little more than rags. In her small hands, she clutched a piece of stale bread, a treasure she was now, impossibly, holding out to him. "Sir, are you crying because you're hungry, too?" she asked, her innocence a devastating counterpoint to the raw, sophisticated grief that racked his body. She offered him half of her meager meal, an act of pure, uncalculated charity that struck him dumb. David raised his bloodshot eyes and met the child's. They were large, dark, and filled with a solemn, knowing concern. For one surreal, heart-stopping moment, the richest man in New York was being offered comfort by a child who clearly had nowhere to sleep that night. "No, little one," he managed to say, his voice a raw, broken thing. "It's not hunger." "Then it's longing," she said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. Her wisdom was ancient, jarring in its contrast to her small, undernourished frame. "My grandmother always said there are only two kinds of tears in this world, hunger tears, and missing tears." The simple, profound words pierced through the layers of his wealth, his power, his carefully constructed defenses, and struck him directly in the heart. Today was the anniversary. 1 year to the day since he had lost custody of his son, Michael. 1 year since his ex-wife had moved to London, taking their 8-year-old boy with her, leaving behind a void so vast and so deep that all the money in the world could not begin to fill it. "What's your name?" David asked, wiping his face with the back of his hand, the rain mingling with his tears. "Destiny," she replied, a sudden, brilliant smile revealing to missing front teeth. "And you, David, it's nice to meet you, Destiny." She studied his face for a long moment, her gaze serious, assessing. Then, with a decisive gesture, she broke her piece of bread in two and once again insisted on offering him half. "I can't cure your longing," she said, her voice soft but firm, "but I can share my bread. Food that is shared always feeds the heart more than the stomach." He accepted the piece of bread, a lump forming in his throat. He, David Thompson, a titan of industry, a man who could buy and sell entire companies before breakfast, was receiving charity from a homeless child. The absurdity, the raw, humbling power of the moment, overwhelmed him. "Destiny, where do you live?" he asked, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. The girl's smile faltered, just for a moment. "Everywhere and nowhere," she replied, a disconcerting maturity in her tone. "Since my mother disappeared, I've learned to fend for myself." "Your mother disappeared." The words sent a chill down his spine, a premonition he couldn't yet understand. "About 6 months ago," she said, her voice matter-of-fact. "She worked cleaning offices. In buildings like that one." She pointed a small, dirty finger towards the gleaming, monolithic skyscraper that housed his own company, Fintech Solutions. "One day she ate some chocolates that an elegant lady gave her. She said they made her feel strange. The next day, some men in suits came and took her away. They said they were taking her to a doctor. I never saw her again." A cold dread began to seep into David's bones. There was something disturbingly, terrifyingly familiar about that story. A resonance he couldn't quite place, a connection his mind was struggling to make. "And no one took care of you after that?" Destiny shrugged, a gesture that seemed to be her trademark, a small, weary acceptance of the world's indifference. "They tried to put me in a shelter, but I ran away. The other kids there, they fought all the time. And the adults didn't really care about us." As she spoke, David observed her, truly saw her for the first time. He noted that where her eyes constantly scanned her surroundings, the way she seemed to know every nook and cranny of the street, the way she had mentally mapped out the safe places and the dangerous ones. A 10-year-old child, surviving alone on the brutal streets of Manhattan for 6 months. The thought was a physical blow. "Destiny," he said, his voice urgent. "Do you have a place to stay tonight? The forecast says the rain is going to get worse." She shrugged again. "I always managed. There's a space under the overpass that keeps me mostly dry." In that moment, David made a decision, an impulsive, instinctive choice that would irrevocably alter the course of his life. "How about you come and have dinner with me?" I have an apartment just a few blocks from here, I promise you. It's safe. Her eyes, which had been so open and trusting, narrowed with a sudden, sharp suspicion. She had learned, the hard way, that the promises of adults were often traps. Why would you do that for me? You don't even know me. The directness of the question, the raw, unvarnished honesty of it, cut through his own internal fog. The answer came to him, simple and true. Because you shared your bread with me when you thought I was hungry. Because today is a very sad day for me, and you, for some reason, have made me feel a little bit better. And because no child should ever have to be alone on the streets. Destiny considered his words for a long, silent moment. She looked from his face to the piece of bread still clutched in his hand, and then back to his eyes. Okay, she said finally. But if you try anything weird, I'll scream. And I'll run, and you won't catch me. Fair enough, David agreed, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. He stood, his expensive suit clinging to him like a second skin, and held out his hand to her as they walked through the rain streets towards the unimaginable luxury of his Upper East Side apartment. David couldn't shake the feeling of a terrible, looming coincidence. A lost child, whose mother, a cleaner in his own building, had vanished after eating chocolates given to her by an elegant lady. There was a darkness at the heart of this story, a darkness that he felt, with a sickening certainty, was somehow connected to him. But what intrigued him most was the girl herself. There was something more to Destiny than met the eye, a sharp, assessing intelligence lurking behind the innocent facade, as if she understood far more about the world, his world, than a 10-year-old child ever should. He had a chilling premonition that this chance encounter was no chance at all, and that the truth about what had happened to Destiny's mother was far closer, and far more dangerous, than he could possibly imagine. David's apartment was a testament to his success, a sprawling minimalist space that occupied the entire top floor of a historic pre-war building. It offered panoramic, breathtaking views of a rain-swept Central Park. Destiny stepped inside, her small, bare feet silent on the polished hardwood floors, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Took in every detail, the grand piano in the corner, the massive, abstract paintings that adorned the walls, the sheer, unimaginable scale of the luxury that surrounded her. Wow, she whispered, her voice a small, reverent sound in the vast, quiet space. It's like one of those movies, where the rich people live. David managed a weak smile, but a familiar ache tightened in his chest. All of this wealth, all of this success, and it hadn't been enough to keep his own son by his side. Would you like to take a hot shower? He asked, his voice a little hoarse. I can find some clothes for you, and I'll fix us something for dinner. While Destiny was in the shower, the sound of running water, a strange and welcome intrusion into the silence of his life, David sprang into action. He made 2 calls, his mind working with the cold, swift precision that had made him a legend. On Wall Street, the first was to his personal lawyer, Thomas Mitchell, one of the most feared and respected criminal defense attorneys in Manhattan. Tom, I need to see you urgently. Not on the phone. Can you come to my apartment in an hour? Of course, David. Is everything all right? Has there been a development in Michael's custody case? No, it's something else. It's complicated. It involves a missing child, and it may be connected to fintech solutions. There was a pregnant pause on the other end of the line. David, you're worrying me. What, exactly, are we talking about? 1 hour, Tom, and bring everything you have on child abduction protocols. The second call was to Rebecca Chen, the director of corporate security at Fintech Solutions. Rebecca was a former FBI agent, a woman whose loyalty was absolute and whose competence was unquestionable. David had recruited her himself, and he trusted her implicitly. Rebecca, I need you to do something for me, and I need it to be completely off the books. Send me a list of all contract cleaning staff from the past 2 years. I want to see every name, but I'm particularly interested in black women between the ages of 25 and 40. Is this related to an internal investigation, David? Maybe, and Rebecca. For now, this stays strictly between us. When Destiny emerged from the shower, scrubbed clean and wrapped in one of his oversized, fluffy bathrobes, she looked like a different child. The grime and the weariness had been washed away, revealing a delicate, intelligent face, and there was something else, a flicker of a resemblance to someone he knew, a familiar echo in the shape of her eyes, the curve of her smile. It was a connection he couldn't quite place, and it bothered him. Destiny, he asked, as she sat down at the large kitchen island where he had prepared a simple dinner of grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. Do you remember your mother's full name? Jasmine Washington, she replied, her voice clear and certain, but everyone on our street just called her Jazz. David almost choked on his coffee. Jasmine Washington. The name was familiar, very familiar. He had seen it recently, on one of the monthly reports on outsourced employees that he always meticulously reviewed. Destiny. Do you know what floor of my building your mother worked on? The girl frowned, her brow furrowed in concentration. She always talked about a very high floor. The one where they had the really important meetings. She said sometimes, if she was quiet, she could hear the important people talking through the doors. David's blood ran cold. The 42nd floor. The executive boardroom, a space where only 5 people in the entire company had unrestricted access. Himself, his vice president, Victoria Ashford, his chief financial officer, James Harrison, the director of human resources, Patricia Wells, and, did she ever mention any names? Anyone who was particularly nice to her, the lady who gave her the chocolates. Destiny took a thoughtful bite of her sandwich. She said the lady was very elegant. She had gray hair, always pulled back in a tight bun. She wore expensive glasses, and she always spoke to the other women on the cleaning staff as if they were dumb children. He felt as if he had been punched in the gut. The description was a perfect, chillingly accurate portrait of Victoria Ashford, his 58-year-old vice president, the woman who had been his mentor, his partner, his most trusted advisor since he had founded the company 15 years ago. Victoria, who had helped him build his empire. Victoria, who had unfettered access to every system, every secret, every corner of his company. Destiny, he said, his voice carefully neutral. Did your mother ever mention anything specific that she heard at these meetings? The girl's eyes narrowed, just for a moment, and for the first time David saw it clearly. A sharp, piercing intelligence, a level of perception that was far beyond her years. Mr. David, she said, her voice careful, measured, do you think the lady who gave my mother the chocolates is the same lady who works at your company? The directness of the question, the speed with which she had connected the dots, took his breath away. It's possible, he admitted, his voice grim. And if it is, Destiny, I promise you, we are going to find out what really happened to your mother. At that moment, the intercom buzzed. It was Thomas Mitchell. Tom is here, David announced. He's my lawyer, and he's a person I trust completely. Can you tell him everything you've told me? Destiny nodded, her expression solemn, as if she understood, with a child's unerring instinct, that the world was about to change. Thomas Mitchell was a tall, rail-thin man with a shock of gray hair and piercing blue eyes that had unnerved seasoned prosecutors for decades. He listened in silence as David laid out the situation, his expression unreadable, his pen occasionally scratching a note on a legal pad. Let me get this straight, Thomas said finally, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. An outsourced employee at your company disappears after allegedly being given drugged chocolates by someone who fits the description of your second-in-command. Her 10-year-old daughter is left orphaned, and survives for 6 months on the streets of Manhattan. And you believe this may be connected to what, exactly? David took a deep breath. Tom, 3 months ago, Victoria began pressuring me to sell my majority stake in the company. She started talking about the need to professionalize management, to bring in institutional investors. I refused, categorically. Then, last week, she made a veiled threat. She casually mentioned that it might be in my best interest to reconsider certain decisions before some compromising information about the company came to light. Thomas and David exchanged a long, meaningful look. They both knew what that kind of language meant in the cutthroat world of corporate finance. It was a prelude to blackmail. You think Jasmine Washington overheard something? Something that would give Victoria leverage over you? Not only that, David replied, turning to his laptop. Rebecca just sent me the employee list. Jasmine Washington was officially terminated on the exact same day that Destiny says she disappeared. The reason cited, breach of confidentiality protocol. Thomas leaned forward, his eyes narrowed, which means Victoria knew exactly who she was, and she had a motive to silence her. There's more, David continued, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he accessed the company's internal servers. Jasmine had been specifically assigned to clean the executive boardroom every Tuesday and Thursday, the same days that Victoria held her private off-the-books strategy meetings with a group of outside investors. Destiny, who had been sitting quietly, listening to the conversation with an unnerving intensity, finally spoke. My mother always said that powerful people do bad things when they think no one is watching. She was seeing something she wasn't supposed to see, wasn't she? The profound, simple wisdom of the observation left both men silent for a moment. David, Thomas said, his voice grave. "If your suspicions are correct, we're not just talking about a power struggle, we're talking about a criminal conspiracy. Witness tampering, kidnapping. This is far more serious than you think." David nodded, a cold, hard fire igniting in his eyes. It was a look Thomas had seen before, in the courtroom, just before David delivered the killing blow to a business rival. It was the look of a man who had decided to go to war, regardless of the consequences. "Tom, I want you to prepare the paperwork. I want to request temporary custody of Destiny, officially, first thing tomorrow morning." And unofficially, he paused, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. A smile that held no humor, no warmth, only the promise of a cold and calculated retribution. "Unofficially, I want you to hire the best private investigator in New York. Victoria Ashford has no idea who she's really up against. She knows me as the successful CEO, the grieving, absent father. She has no idea what I'm capable of when someone threatens an innocent child." While Thomas began to jot down a list of legal steps, David looked over at Destiny. She was quietly working on a complex jigsaw puzzle he had given her, her small face a mask of concentration, but every so often she would glance up, her eyes meeting his, and he could see it again. That sharp, assessing intelligence, that unnerving maturity forged in the crucible of survival. He had a growing suspicion that Destiny was hiding something, that her mother had shared more with her than a child should ever have to know. Each new discovery, each piece of the puzzle that clicked into place, only intensified his conviction. This had not been a chance encounter. And Victoria Ashford, in her arrogance, had made the biggest strategic mistake of her long and storied career. She had underestimated the power of the truth to find its way out of the darkness. And she had underestimated the fury of a father who had just found a new reason to fight. In the 3 days that followed, David Thompson underwent a metamorphosis. The grieving, distracted CEO vanished, replaced by a quiet, meticulous, and dangerously focused predator. To the outside world, to Victoria Ashford, he was a man on the ropes, weakened by her veiled threats, on the verge of capitulation. In reality, he was secretly, systematically, building the most devastating case of his career. Rebecca Chen, his ex-FBI security chief, had become his shadow, his most valuable operative. Her investigation had yielded terrifying results. "It's not just Jasmine Washington, David," she had reported, her voice grim, during their last secret meeting in his apartment. 3 other contract employees have been terminated for breach of confidentiality in the past 2 years, all of them women, all of them black, all of them assigned to the 42nd floor. This isn't a coincidence, it's a pattern, a systematic elimination of potential witnesses. Destiny, who had adapted to her new life with a quiet, watchful resilience, was in the living room, ostensibly doing the homework from the prestigious private school David had managed to enroll her in. She overheard fragments of the conversation, her small face a mask of concentration. "Mr. David," she called out, during dinner that night, her voice startlingly clear in the quiet apartment. "Can I tell you something important about my mother?" David and Rebecca, who had stayed for dinner to brief him on her latest findings, gave the girl their full, undivided attention. "Mum always kept her important things in a little notebook," Destiny began, her voice steady. She hid it under the mattress of her bed. "She always said, when you hear things you shouldn't, you write them down so you don't forget, so the truth doesn't get lost." David's heart began to pound against his ribs. "Destiny, do you have any idea where that notebook might be now?" When the men in the suits came to take her away, "I grabbed a few of her things before I ran," she said, her eyes dark with the memory. "The notebook is in the backpack. I hid it in my safe place." Rebecca and David exchanged a look, a single, silent communication that crackled with a new, electrifying possibility. If Jasmine had documented what she had witnessed, that notebook could be the smoking gun, the definitive, irrefutable proof they needed. "Can you take us there?" Rebecca asked, her voice gentle, coaxing. The next day, Destiny led them on a journey into the city's underbelly, through a labyrinth of back alleys and underground service tunnels, to an old, abandoned subway station. There, tucked away behind a loose ventilation grate, was a small, worn backpack. Inside, wrapped in a threadbare sweater, alongside a few faded family photographs, was a simple, hardcover notebook. Its pages were filled with Jasmine Washington's neat, meticulous script. It was a diary of corporate malfeasance, a damning record of Victoria Ashford's secret life. October 23rd, David read aloud, his voice low, incredulous. Victoria met today with two men with heavy Russian accents. They talked about moving money through a series of offshore accounts. They mentioned something about laundering 50 million through shell companies based in the Caribbean. November 15th, he continued, his blood running cold. Victoria was arguing on the phone today with a man named Martinez. She was very angry. She said that if he didn't cooperate, accidents have a way of happening to people who talk too much. December 2nd, Victoria showed a man in a grey suit some photographs today. They were of a bank account in the Cayman Islands. She was laughing, she said. David will never suspect. He still trusts me like a sister. He felt a wave of nausea, a profound, soul-deep betrayal. For 15 years, he had trusted this woman, valued her counsel, considered her family, and all along she had been using his company, his creation, as a front for an international money laundering operation. There's more, Rebecca said, her voice tight, pointing to the last entry, dated the day of Jasmine's disappearance, January 15th. The entry began. Victoria knows I've been listening. She found me in the boardroom after one of her secret meetings. She offered me chocolates today, said they were a special, imported brand. They tasted strange, bitter. I'm feeling dizzy. If anything happens to me, I told Destiny to go to the neighbor's apartment next door. Please, somebody, take care of my little girl. The silence in the dusty, abandoned tunnel was broken only by the sound of Destiny's small, choked sob. She knew, she whispered. She knew something bad was going to happen, didn't she? David knelt and pulled the small, trembling girl into his arms. Your mother was very smart, Destiny, he said, his voice thick with a raw, unfamiliar emotion, and she was very, very brave. She documented everything, so that one day, the truth would come out. And I promise you, it will. Meanwhile, Victoria Ashford, cocooned in her own arrogance, was making the most fatal mistake of her criminal career, believing she had neutralized the threat with Jasmine's disappearance. Believing that David was weakened and intimidated, she intensified her pressure campaign, sending a series of increasingly direct and threatening messages about her intention to seize control of the company. David, one of her emails read, I do hope you've had time to reconsider our conversation about professionalizing the management of fintech solutions. It would be a terrible shame if certain tax irregularities were to come to light, just as we are entering into negotiations with our new international investors. What Victoria didn't know was that David had, with Rebecca's help, discreetly installed a sophisticated monitoring software on every one of the company's systems. Every email she sent, every call she made from a corporate phone, every time she accessed the company's servers, was being recorded, archived, and automatically forwarded to Rebecca. Thomas Mitchell, a man who savored the intricate dance of a complex legal battle, was in his element. He had assembled a legal dossier that was nothing short of a masterpiece. In addition to the evidence of money laundering and corporate blackmail from Jasmine's notebook, they now had irrefutable proof of witness tampering, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit a felony. David, this is bigger than just Victoria, Thomas explained, during a late-night strategy session in David's apartment. The connections we've uncovered suggest a sophisticated criminal network, operating through a number of legitimate corporations. Victoria is a key player, but she's just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The FBI and the Federal Prosecutor's Office are very, very interested. How long do you need, Tom? How long until we can be certain that when we strike, she has absolutely no way to escape? 2 more days. I need to coordinate with the feds. When we move, it has to be a perfectly executed, synchronized operation. That night, David tucked Destiny into bed, a ritual that had become the new, solid anchor of his life. But this time, as he finished reading her a story, she surprised him with a question, her small voice filled with a child's simple, devastating honesty. Mr. David, when you catch the bad woman who hurt my mum, will you still be my temporary dad? The question, the raw vulnerability of it, hit him with the force of a physical blow. In the space of one short, tumultuous week, this extraordinary, resilient child had filled a void in his life that he hadn't even known was there. Destiny, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't hide. If you want me, too, I would be honored to be your dad forever, not just temporarily. The smile that spread across her face was brighter, more beautiful, and all the glittering lights of the Manhattan skyline. The next day, Victoria made her final, fatal mistake. Frustrated by David's apparent passivity, his failure to capitulate to her demands, she decided to force the issue. She called an emergency meeting of the board of directors, her intention to stage a corporate coup. to force a vote of no confidence and have him removed as president of the company. I will require everyone to be present tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. sharp, she wrote in a company-wide email to all board members. We have urgent matters concerning the leadership and future direction of this company that can no longer be postponed. David read the email, and a slow, cold smile spread across his face. It was a smile that Rebecca would later describe as absolutely predatory. Victoria, in her hubris, had just dug her own grave. She had called the very meeting he needed to expose her, publicly, in front of every relevant witness. Rebecca, he said into his phone, his voice a low, dangerous purr call. Thomas, it's time. We're putting the plan into action. As Victoria slept soundly in her lavish penthouse apartment, dreaming of her imminent victory, of the final, triumphant seizure of the empire she had helped to build, David remained awake, finalizing the last, intricate details of a revenge that would be served with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel and the devastating, unstoppable force of a tsunami. For 15 years, she had underestimated him, seeing him as a brilliant but naive protege who depended on her guidance. She was about to discover that she had created a monster, not a monster of cruelty, but one of relentless, unforgiving justice. And she was about to learn that the price for terrorizing an innocent child would be paid in full, with compound interest, in the form of a public humiliation and a total, catastrophic destruction from which there would be no recovery. The Solutions boardroom, a space usually reserved for the quiet, civilized slaughter of corporate rivals, had never witnessed a bloodbath of this magnitude. Victoria Ashford swept in at 10 a.m. sharp, her confidence absolute, her briefcase filled with the forged documents she intended to use to frame David for tax evasion. Her plan was simple, elegant, and she believed, foolproof. Gentlemen of the board, she began, her voice resonating with its customary, commanding authority. I have called this emergency meeting to discuss a matter of grave importance. The current leadership of this company has become a liability, and its incompetence is putting our very future at risk. David sat at the head of the long, polished table, his expression unreadable, watching as she expertly wove the web of her own destruction. At his side, Thomas Mitchell sat poised, waiting for the precise moment to strike. I have evidence, Victoria continued, opening her briefcase with a theatrical flourish, that David has been making a series of highly questionable decisions. Decisions that could seriously compromise our relationships with our international investors. I believe it is time for a change in leadership. It was then that David, slowly, deliberately, rose to his feet. Victoria, how interesting that you should mention our international investors, especially considering your recent, and very private, meetings with certain representatives of a Russian criminal organization. Victoria's face, which had been a mask of cool confidence, went slack with shock. What are you talking about? David nodded to Thomas, who pressed a button on a small remote. A projector screen descended from the ceiling, and the first page of Jasmine Washington's notebook appeared, her neat, clear handwriting magnified for all to see. This, David said, his voice as cold and hard as granite, is the handwriting of Jasmine Washington, the contract employee you had eliminated because she had the misfortune of overhearing too much. That's ridiculous, Victoria sputtered, her composure beginning to crack. I've never. October 23rd, David read aloud, his voice ringing through the stunned silence of the room. Victoria met with two men with heavy Russian accents. They talked about moving $50 million through a series of shell companies. The other board members exchanged shocked, disbelieving glances. Victoria scrambled to regain control. Anyone can fake a notebook. This is preposterous. Thomas Mitchell smiled, a slow, predatory smile. Which is why, he said, his voice a low, menacing purr. We also brought the recordings. The audio filled the room, Victoria's own unmistakable voice, crisp and clear, discussing illegal bank transfers, threatening witnesses, planning, in meticulous detail, how to use fintech solutions as a front for her international criminal operations. Impossible, she whispered, her face ashen. How did you get this? Our esteemed security director, Rebecca Chen, installed a new state-of-the-art monitoring system throughout the company a week ago, David explained, his voice deceptively calm. Every phone call, every keystroke, every access to the company's servers has been recorded. Victoria looked around the table, her eyes wild with desperation, but she found no allies, no sympathetic faces, only the horrified, accusing stares of the men she had intended to manipulate. You don't understand. I built this company. I built it with David. You built a criminal enterprise. using my company as your personal piggy bank. David corrected her, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. And when Jasmine Washington discovered what you were doing, you had her poisoned, kidnapped, and illegally committed to a private psychiatric clinic under a false name. As if on cue, the boardroom doors swung open, and 2 federal agents, their faces grim and impassive, stepped into the room. Victoria Ashford, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, attempted murder, and the kidnapping of a minor. She tried to run, a final, pathetic act of defiance, but her legs seemed to give way, and she stumbled, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. David, please, she begged, her voice a raw, desperate sob. We can work this out. I taught you everything you know. You taught me how to recognize people like you, David replied, his voice devoid of any emotion as he watched the agent snap the handcuffs onto her wrists. And you taught me that sometimes, justice needs a little help. As Victoria was dragged from the room, her screams of innocence echoing down the long, marbled hallway, David turned to face the stunned members of his board. Gentlemen, I apologize for allowing a criminal of this magnitude to infiltrate our company, but I can assure you, starting today, FinTech Solutions will become a model of corporate transparency and ethical conduct. Rebecca Chen entered the room, carrying a fresh stack of documents. David, we've located Victoria's offshore accounts. We're looking at over $2.3 billion in illegal transactions, stretching back over the last 5 years. The silence in the room was absolute. Victoria Ashford, the respected, feared, untouchable matriarch of Manhattan business, had just been exposed as one of the most prolific financial criminals of the decade. And Jasmine Washington, David asked, his voice tight. We have the location of the clinic, Rebecca replied, a rare smile touching her lips. The rescue operation is scheduled for this afternoon. David allowed himself a small, weary smile. Destiny would have her mother back. Victoria would lose everything, her fortune, her reputation, her freedom, and he had learned a valuable, if painful, lesson. Underestimating a father, desperate to find justice for an innocent child, was the most expensive mistake any criminal could ever make. 3 months later, David stood in the garden of his apartment, watching as Destiny and Jasmine played on the lush green lawn. Jasmine, after weeks of intensive medical care and therapy, had made a full recovery. Mother and daughter, now officially his family, the adoption paperwork having been finalized just last week, were a portrait of radiant, hard-won happiness. Daddy David, Destiny called out, running towards him, her face alight with a joy that filled the empty spaces in his heart. Mummy says I can have a pony in my new room. Daddy David, the 2 words had become the new, solid anchor of his life. Michael, his son, was due to arrive from London next month, to meet his new sister. His ex-wife, Mariana, having seen the profound change in him, had agreed to regular extended visits. FinTech Solutions, under its new transparent leadership, was thriving. With Victoria's corrosive influence removed, the company had doubled its market value in just 3 months, attracting a new wave of global investors impressed by David's radical commitment to ethical business practices. Victoria Ashford, on the other hand, was facing a sentence of 25 years to life in a federal penitentiary. Her vast ill-gotten fortune had been seized, her reputation obliterated, her former allies and sycophants having abandoned her completely. The woman who had once reigned over Wall Street now languished in a cold, sterile cell, financially and socially bankrupt. You know, Jasmine said, as they sat down to dinner that evening, her voice soft, her eyes shining. When I was in that clinic, the only thing that kept me alive was the thought of Destiny. I never, in my wildest dreams, imagined that I would find not only my daughter, but a whole new family. David smiled, looking at the 2 people who had so unexpectedly, so profoundly, transformed his life. Victoria had tried to destroy him, to take everything he had built, but in doing so, she had inadvertently given him the one thing his money could never buy, a family, built not on power or prestige, but on a foundation of genuine love, shared sorrow, and the quiet, miraculous resilience of the human heart. True revenge was not her destruction. It was the beautiful, lasting, love-filled life he was now building, a life she could never have, a life she could never even begin to understand.